Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTB World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the YAUM-E-TAQADDUS-E-QURAN that is being observed in Pakistan today. And this is an important day, especially in light of what has happened recently in Sweden, where the desecration of the holy book of the Muslims happened back on the occasion of Eid al-Adha. And this is important, especially in terms of the way it has hurt the sentiment of the Muslim population, not just in Pakistan, but in the entire world. And this is especially also important when the debate between freedom of expression and the respect of certain religious communities and minorities is held. And this balance, of course, is something that needs to be held. There have been massive protests throughout the world that have been seen in Pakistan. Just today, we had many different protests throughout the country with a number of resolutions, the most important one being passed by the joint session of the parliament just yesterday, condemning this incident, of course, which the foreign minister has claimed is a blatant provocation. And it is important in terms of the kind of action that the Muslim community in the entire world is demanding against such acts in the future and for its prevention. The response, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has quoted the response by the Swedish government is not enough in the form of just a condemnation, and perhaps more is required in terms of legal action. And it seems that the Swedish authorities may be mulling over their protest law in the aftermath of these protests. But what exactly is going to happen? What sort of action can be taken? What can the united stance of the Muslim Ummah do in not just the form of protest or condemnation, but actual action to prevent the incidents such as this and other acts of Islamophobia throughout the world, is something that we will be discussing in the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I have been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi. We've also been joined by political analyst Mr. Agha Ikrar Haroon, who's also joined us in the studios. And we've been joined by an international Islamic scholar, Mr. Noordin Wilderman, who has joined us online. Thank you very much for being a part of the discussion. I'll start with you, Mr. Noordin, and thank you for joining us. I know that there's only a handful of minutes that we have with you, so I'd like to pick your brains as much as I can. Regarding this particular incident, of course, it's important not just in what this one incident has done in terms of hurting the sentiment of the Muslim population. It obviously opens a much larger debate in terms of the sentiments of any religious group or any other community, and how exactly does the line need to be drawn with freedom of expression and the right for people to protest. And this, of course, has resulted in massive protests. But could you help us understand the nuances of the situation and what needs to be done as the way forward?
Yes, so thank you very much for having me. My name is Noordin Wilderman from the Netherlands, and also in the Netherlands, a country close to Sweden, we have had many burnings of the Quran at previous protests. So I think the first thing that's very important to understand is that we should actually not refer to this as an incident, as it is not. We find that in Western European countries, there is a small minority. This is not a very significant group. It's a very small minority of bigots who actually use these type of actions to make provocations against the Muslim community. But the problem is that they are right now they're not supported by governments, but they are to some extent protected by governments, because governments most often value their acts, even though they are this despicable, as being a part of the freedom of expression. So what we see is that many Islamic symbols are being attacked in this way. So we're talking about the desecration of the Quran. We have incidents where, well, so again, it's not incidents. We have a pattern of attacks against mosques, for instance, where they were smearing it with the blood of pigs, or where they are actually cutting off the head of a pig and they place it in a mosque, or they place it in a building that is being constructed as a mosque. So this, of course, hurts the feeling of Muslims also within the West, right? So I think that the Muslim community in which country, either when you're in the country where it takes place, or if you're on the other side of the globe, we are one ummah, and together we feel the pain when somebody does something like this. Right now, for the Muslims in Western European countries, there's an initiative going on, which I think is very interesting. It is launched by an organization from the Netherlands, where they have grouped a team of lawyers who are making an analysis of the way that the Dutch law and also the European law is constructed regarding the freedom of expression. And they have found that there is a legal way to actually prevent people and not allow people to desecrate the Quran in this way without being an obstruction to the freedom of expression. And I think this is a very promising way because it will allow the people in governments to have the legal tools to combat this and not to essentially facilitate it as we are seeing right now.
Absolutely, and I understand that, and it's an important aspect to move forward as well. But could you help me understand the scale at which this exists at the moment? Because I understand that governments across the world of Muslim nations have been asking for certain legal action, and whenever that's talked about, there is this issue, the complication of allowing people to protest or having the freedom of expression. And I understand if somebody is getting together to find loopholes in that, that's a good way forward. But where is this movement currently in terms of its reach and the scale at which it can help, and how it can be replicated by people in other nations to actually follow the same model and make it a more collective international response?
Yeah, so the scale of the people who are actually doing these attacks is very small, but the number of times that we see desecrations of the Quran is, for instance, only in the Netherlands, it happened multiple times in the past year. Mostly due to one individual. So it's very important that we need to understand that these people who are doing this, they do not represent these Western European countries. They do not represent these civilians living in these countries. It is a very small extremist and bigot group, but they are using the freedom of expression. So when it comes to the size of the pushback, right now, you're seeing that after the most recent event in Sweden, that it is now that there is becoming a momentum now for us to have this debate. The legal research on how to proceed has been mostly completed. So right now we're pushing this towards at least the Dutch government and also towards the European government. I'm actually not part of the team that is doing it, but I'm so proud of their work that I sometimes refer to them as us, like we're doing it. It's just because I'm so proud of the work that they are doing, and I think that it is, and I think it's a very important step towards preventing this. For instance, they found how to legally argue that burning the Quran in itself is not a freedom of expression. Now, to some degree, everybody understands that if you burn a Quran, that's not an argument. It's not a rhetorical statement. It's not an opinion. But so far, these demonstrators are saying that that is the way that they wish to show their opinion. Now, then, if you were to block it from the government perspective, they're saying, okay, so you're blocking my freedom of expression. So they are right now coming up with constructions of allowing people to voice their expression, stating that burning the Quran in itself is not an expression of an opinion, and it's not an opinion by itself, but it's actually just an act that a person is doing. So by limiting the person to commit that act, you're not limiting their freedom of expression. If they got an opinion about the Quran, let them write a book.
Right, absolutely. And I understand your point. This also brings me to the way that the international community, especially the Muslim Ummah, has responded to this. But it's also important that this is perhaps more than just about one particular religion. But I want to understand where the onus and the problem actually lies in terms of us moving forward. Do you think that there is a sort of need for unity among the different Muslim nations to be able to address this problem globally and make sure that the action is in fact taken? Or do you think that there is more of a need from the West to understand and react to such acts of provocation in terms of what is needed and what sort of sentiment is heard? Do you think that there is a sort of discrimination the way certain acts are reacted against and others are not?
Yeah, so multiple things are needed at the same time. I think that with the recent statement of the IOC, that we see that now from a geopolitical level, a combination of Muslim countries is starting to pressure the West, saying that they are seeing things happening, which causes unrest not only in the Western European countries, but also, of course, in the rest of the Islamic world, which they are pressuring them to combat against. And at the same time, we have local initiatives, which are also pressuring local governments to take action. And something which is very important is that on a local level, so really within the city of which something like this occurs, by law, the local government has a task to make sure that whatever is going on within the city, they must always make sure that there is no civil unrest. So I think that we get to the understanding more and more that this type of demonstrations where people are desecrating the Quran, and I'm trying to use legal terms here. When I speak from my emotion or when I speak from a theological perspective, of course, my statements will be more harsh. But that will not impact the government's policies much. So from a legal perspective, we're getting to a point where we can actually state and show and prove that allowing these actions create civil unrest, and therefore the local government is like it's mandatory for them to take action. So I think that it's very important that we always have this multi-level approach where you see that there is, from a geopolitical perspective, there is a pushback towards this. And obviously, the more the Muslim countries are united, the stronger their voice and the stronger their pushback will be. We see it from a local level on a country basis, and we see it really local within the cities where these things are taking place. And it's so annoying because imagine, like we saw that the Swedish embassy, I thought it was in Baghdad, was attacked because of these two idiots in Sweden. So these two people, they do not, in Sweden, who actually desecrated the Quran, they do not represent the people of Sweden. They do not represent the government of Sweden. They do not represent the sentiment or the ideas or the values of the people of Sweden. But it's the acts which are now allowed. But so the way that the law allows them to do it creates a circumstance where two individuals, two bigots, can create such a big international conflict. And I think that it is in the best interest of everybody to make sure that we're preventing the situation where so small group of people can create so much damage on a larger scale. Imagine
Absolutely.
working in Baghdad for the Swedish embassy with the best intentions, with the best, with the best intentions of trying to serve your country and trying to serve it within the context of Baghdad, only to find that in Sweden, two bigots are doing this, and now people are standing in front of your embassy. I mean, that must be a terrible sight. I think nobody
Absolutely, and
wants that.
understand that these are valid points that are being raised, and we'll talk more about that as the show continues. But I know you have to leave. Thank you very much, Mr. Noordin, for joining us and being a part of the discussion and sharing your valuable input.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Iqra Saab, the situation, of course, presents a lot of these complications that we've just discussed with Mr. Noordin, but we'll talk more about that. But let's also start off with what Pakistan has done today, especially in terms of our observation of the YAUM-E-TAQADDUS-E-QURAN. And it's important for us to be able to highlight and reiterate how important and significant this day is for us and what it means in terms of action to be taken. Firstly, your take on what sort of a point or a stance the countries such as Pakistan need to take against this matter, and how do we maintain the momentum? How do we just not limit it to one day and actually take that forward into serious action?
First of all, we appreciate government of Pakistan that at a state level we have protested, but our protest was very peaceful, and it was basically, you can say, a token of Pakistan expression to the international world what we think about this very unfortunate incident. So this was a very good move and very politically very strong move, and definitely it has sent a very strong and but very positive and pleasant message to the world that Pakistani had a protest, but it was a very peaceful protest, and they were focused what they wanted to raise the issue. I little bit disagree with the friend who was talking about the European the single person or 2 person or 3 person reaction. No, this is a problem with their laws. So I mean, why we get such news in Scandinavian countries after every 5 years or every 10 years, every 20 years? Why? This is my question. Why Denmark, why Sweden, why Norway are all those ahead in taking such very unfortunate actions? Because their laws allows them. and unfortunately there is only 20% non-believers and 72% Christians and 5% Muslims. This is not my figures, these are the figures of the European Value Study of 2022. So this 20% non-believers are allowed to encroach the right of the 72% Christians and 5% Muslims, and this is not a matter of human rights, or this is not a matter of freedom of expression, and even this is not a matter of the Islamophobia. They do it with every other religion. They are this actually now in Europe. I attended this conference on November 2021. Yes, 2021 in November 6 or 7. The problem is the believer and the non-believer. Non-believers are encroaching, and they have already encroached the rights of believers. So this is a debate is going on in Europe. It is not a matter of Islam or Christianity or Judaism. It is a very serious matter. And I must appreciate European think tanks. Now they are taking initiative to gather all believers at one platform, and they have started discussion about that, why this 20% non-believers are every right to encroach every common right of believers. This is the issue.
Okay, but I want to understand this a bit further. You mean to say that non-believers who are not adhering to any particular religion are attacking people who are adhering to one or the other religion and believing in something or the other, and that perhaps is something that is a right given to them by the state?
Yes, yes, of course their law. This when if you go to the history of the Scandinavian countries in '96 and in the '60s, there was a move of the freedom of expression. That freedom of expression had given them so much right, they can do everything by using the word of freedom of expression, even the burning of the holy books of the religions. So this is not
right,
a
but by
individual.
That standard, isn't that same right
Sorry.
given to others as well?
Pardon?
Isn't the same right given to others as well?
No, non-believer have no book. So I mean, they are very clear. They don't have any symbol of believing. So there are 100 cases
right,
in
but
Europe.
in the same way, believers of a certain religion can hurt the sentiments of a believer of another religion, right? If they
yes, they had been doing. They had been doing with the Jew.
Okay.
I mean, with Judaism, with Christianity, they make mockery of Jesus. If you have seen even their T-shirts, you can find so objectionable. Wordings on their T-shirts about Jesus. We cannot even think about that, even as a Muslims.
Right. Farooq, I want to understand, of course, what is going on in terms of the kind of action that needs to be taken. But for that, I also want to get some clarification based on what really is the issue. Especially in the Western European countries, if we do see such incidents, is it a matter of what the law actually says? Is it a matter of how the law is implemented, how the law is interpreted, or how certain actions are discriminated and certain actions are perhaps taken more seriously? What really is the issue here?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I was thinking that I want to also chime in when Iqrar Sahab was actually going on about non-believers only. The biggest problem with this day and age is, Sana, that there has been incredible toxicity in societies, right? And all of this actually comes from the idea of clash of civilizations, where it is very easy to other any community, especially when they are minority, right? Because of that, I don't actually concede this point that only non-believers burn books. In UK, in the US, there is a pastor who regularly used to actually, collect people and try to burn Quran, right? That kind of toxicity has been there. And the matter regarding West is that their system of governance has evolved in such a way that they haven't seen it as something that might actually wound people, right? Because West actually rose as a revolt against the church. In our parts of the world, of course, religion and state have actually not only coexisted but complemented each other. So the sensitivities of each society is different, and I think because there are minorities there now, the states are also actually opening their hearts and minds and taking into cognizance the issue of concerns. Now, I want to argue this matter from a secular point of view, right? Because yesterday, if you remember, we were discussing Holocaust denying being a crime, and that is, I qualified this, that I can see the point, because it hurts sentiments of people, right? Especially victims of one of the worst crime in history. If that happens, and the states actually take it into cognizance, of course, they can also treat their other citizens who might be Muslims or who might be from other religions but sentimental about their books into account as well, right? This is important to understand. I told you that I used to think before this Holocaust thing, I used to consider myself a free speech, absolutist. But then I started focusing on how not every speech can be deemed as free speech, right? For example, why is it that if you lie on record, it is not considered, freedom of speech, but actually a crime, and that's why you're prosecuted? Similarly, why is it that defamation, libel laws exist, and because they wound people's integrity, their emotions as well, right? With that kind of a situation, I can see why this whole idea of this being misconstrued as freedom of action, freedom of speech, it actually undermines the whole concept of a democratic society. Because the best thing about democracy, Sana, throughout history is its internal harmony. And we have been seeing that evolution since democratic ethos actually came out of France, French Revolution, then American Revolution, and Magna Carta also. With that kind of a situation, I think it is easy to understand. Let us not identify this community might be doing it, that community might be doing it. But remember, Sana, those people who provoke are not activists. They are pranksters, they are opportunists. There is an example in India, for example. In India, continuously you must have seen after the demolition of Babri, one after another, there seems to be some outrageous shock and operation, and with that somebody else is actually thrust into limelight. Once they are recognized, then there are enough people to support them and they become a national brand, right? For example, a few days ago, there was a horrendous episode that took place where a lower caste man is sitting and another man from upper caste actually went and from BJP and peed on him, urinated on that man, right? And with that kind of inhumanity, it was brought to limelight, and the moment it was brought to limelight, immediately there were people who were supporting that man, right? Because Indian society or their ethos actually believes in the fundamental inequality of human beings. But when it comes to Western societies, their foundation is on egalitarianism. Sana, I will be remiss if I don't bring up an excellent episode of harmony that I saw yesterday. You must have seen that video that went viral where a Swedish girl is actually kissing Quran, and she says, I don't know whatever is in it, but because you love it, I am going to accord Quran the respect that it deserves. So there are people, majority of people are good. I don't care whether they are secular, whether they are religious, they are from one religion or another, but the important thing is what comes first, humanity or pranksters or provocation.
Absolutely. And Iqrar Sahab, this is important, especially in terms of the understanding that needs to be there on both sides as to who's responsible. Like earlier we were discussing, there is of course a certain act that takes place in one part of the world, but people all around the world have to pay for it, and it sort of inculcates the same sentiment throughout the world and perhaps deepens the misunderstandings that already exist and divides us. Moving forward, what role do you think countries like Pakistan and other Islamic countries can play in order to bridge this divide? Of course, we need to react in certain ways, which is is not just reactionary in terms of just going all out against anybody who belongs to a certain country or a certain part of the world and a certain community who, of course, where certain actions take place, but to limit that to the actual people responsible, not displace our emotions otherwise. How do we ensure that the media itself and the people and the international community gets to understand that, and we also understand who we are reacting against?
First of all, I believe that the believers should sit together in Pakistan. We should have some think tanks who should start discussions, and in these discussions we should invite all believers, believers of the divine books and otherwise, and then we should have a conversation and interfaith harmony dialogue, and then we can promote this issue, because I still believe this is a very important issue. The particular, I am talking about Europe only. Europe is facing, that is I mean very horrific and very abnormal actions taken by non-believers against believers, against the divine religion, and against the churches, against mosques. So this is normal over there. So we should sit together, all of us, I mean followers of all religion, and then we should start a discussion with, of course, with the international think tanks. Do we have some right, as I'm talking about the believers. So if we have a right, so why our right is being encroached by non-believers?
Right. I also want to understand, Iqra Sahab, that do you think that a body of believers, so to speak, are going to be able to come to the conclusion the way that it's needed in terms of dealing with this issue? Because this, again, is not just about one particular religion. It is about intolerance, and it is about violating somebody and hurting the sentiment of a certain community, and that goes way beyond a religion. So what exactly do you think will this sort of body will be able to encapsulate and bring forth, which is applicable all over the world?
The recommendations to the United Nations.
Yes, but what sort of recommendations will they be if they're emerging from just one standpoint?
Very simple. The believers have books, they have symbols like churches, like mosques, and these symbols and these books must be respected by every country and by every other religion, or and the non-believers also. This is the United Nations forum. There, this discussion should start now. Islamophobia is not. You have seen. At last, United Nations has understood that, and now in March there is a day of Islamophobia, because the discussion continued. There was forums. So now it's a forum of believers and non-believers. This is my understanding, because as a student of theology and student of contemporary religion, I have been watching this issue since last 20 years. The first time I took as a subject when almost half of the Lahore was burnt, when a Quran was disrespected in Denmark, if you remember, in Copenhagen. So this is not a matter of 1 year. This is not a matter of 1 decade. This is for the last 20 years. You can find after every 2 or 3 years an incident in particularly in Scandinavian countries. Why it is only in Scandinavian countries? This is another issue. So there is something in their laws. These laws must be repealed.
Okay, let's talk more about that. Farooq, do you think that this is something that is just converged in a location of the Scandinavian countries, something that it poses a threat to the entire world? Because from where I understand, this is perhaps more of an issue of intolerance than anything else.
Yeah, I kind of am going to agree with you. And while I was listening to Agha Sahab, I was thinking, I have umpteen friends. I'm not an atheist, but I have very good friends who actually claim to be atheist, and they haven't heard a fly, right? I think that it depends on how bigoted a person is, right? When you talk about terrorist organizations around the world, and I'm not merely talking about, those who are coming from Muslim faith, others as well, most of them actually don't come from secular, perspective or any atheistic group. Usually they are actually coming from an extremist religious group. So this is there are 2 or 3 things. I understand that this idea of dividing people and thinking that this is bad group, this is good group, how useful it can be. And of course, policy is always utilitarian. But my humble submission is that I have, as a regular student of religion, I think when I completed my first tafsir of Quran, I was in 5th grade. When I read first Bible, I was in 6th grade. So in 7th, I actually read Talmud and Torah, and for that matter, Bhagavad Gita as well. So I've been a student of religious faiths as well and their texts as well. My humble submission is that any ethos taken to extreme can generate xenophobia, bigotry, hate for other people, and that becomes a problem. The biggest problem with this idea of clash of civilizations is that people who actually don't come from Abrahamic faith actually started banking on it. For example, India, right? Because then Muslims or Christians, or for that matter, Muslims and Jewish people are going to fight, and because of that, they will be able to actually. I keep on telling you about Savitri Devi, a neo-Nazi, or actually a Nazi who went to India in 1920s and actually contaminated Hindu Mahasabha and RSS and their ethos into believing in neo-Nazi value system. Even at this moment, at websites of neo-Nazi groups in the West, Savitri Devi's books are actually published and they're carried, right? Because of that, there is some kind of consensus among such forces that Abrahamic faith should be weakened, right? And they should be fighting among themselves. Now, I understand that many people view themselves, especially Jewish people, have a term that is called a cultural Jew. That means that I don't believe in the faith, but I do actually, carry the culture, right? So there are many seculars among all communities as well, but the onus is also on them, because such bigots, such extremists play a dirty game, and they play at the hands of those people who might actually want to undermine both of the Western civilization, of Western value system, and individual faiths as well. My humble submission is that instead of actually viewing it as atheist or a non-believer versus believer issue, remember in most societies, because religion has a dominant part to play, even in those societies which call themselves secular, the actual secular people usually either are in minority or they are the most vulnerable people. And that's why it worries me that my good friend here would talk in these terms, because in Pakistan, the poor, atheists or agnostics or the moderates or people who actually don't conform to any religion are the most vulnerable people, and they are most humane as well. So I don't want them to be at the receiving end of any kind of anger or hate as well.
Right, absolutely. Krasa, earlier you were talking about the role that Pakistan has played in leading the world towards the issue of Islamophobia and sensitizing them, and then of course bringing this into action as well. But what we saw in terms of a need forward was also that the different countries in which the Muslim Ummah resides are also perhaps are on the same page or have a similar understanding as to what sort of actions do they even consider as part of Islamophobia, as what sort of an understanding there is in terms of the action that is going to be taken, and the way that they're going to then of course bring forth this issue internationally, because again there are political and economic concerns and relationships that are also at play when we talk about international politics. So how exactly do you think that even now, when we see that perhaps everyone is protesting and condemning such an act, there still seems to be a lack of a way forward in terms of a similarity in understanding and putting up a united front? How do we first ensure that we are in fact all talking about the same thing?
Very good question. I would request any country, any Muslim country out of OIC's 56, 57 members, they should move a resolution in United Nations and demand for a General Assembly session to discuss this issue that we have mitigate this Islamophobia issue, but we don't have still, as you mentioned, we don't have any parameters for that. So we need to prepare parameters. And now the major issue is you can say abusive actions against our symbols, our religious symbols. So this is the only way we can move forward. The protest in Pakistan is, I appreciate, and was very, very wonderful and very timely action of the government. And there were hundred other protests all over Muslim world. But what is the end of that? Do we have come up with some recommendations? Did we discuss something serious? What should be done? What is to be done? No. So this is a wave you will remember for 2, 3, 4 days, then you will forget, and then we will find another issue, another action, God forbid, against another religious symbol of Muslims, and then we will again go for a protest or a condemnation. So we are simply wasting our time unless we go to United Nations and raise this issue. This is not the first time now. I mean, I think maximum in last 8 months, this is the 3rd and 4th incident. And only in 3 countries. Why only in 3 countries? Why Norway, Denmark and Sweden are taking lead in that? So this is the question. We are deviating here and there, and we are, this is very simple. There are some laws which allows a single person or 2 person, he can be, a moron, or he can be something, I'm not concerned, but he has a power, he has a official support from the police to go and protest, and
all right, I have 2 questions.
Police is always there.
Right.
In all cases, police was protecting the the person who was doing this.
Okay.
Why?
So 2 questions. Firstly, the resolution that you talked about that needs to be put up in the UN, what sort of value do you think that will bring in? We have a number of resolutions, a plethora of resolutions at the UN, and still there are so many problems that are not resolved, and there is not much that's done. What value do you think that will bring in? And secondly, whether or not such a move should be targeted, as you keep on mentioning and reiterating that it's just certain countries where this issue actually pertains to. So do you think that this should be targeted against those countries, and we need to take particular action against them?
Look, if you talk about the sanctions, we cannot do it. Very simple. Because all 3 countries are the major source of top brand, high-tech information technology and otherwise technologies.
Okay.
So sanctions are not possible, and OIC has never ever gone for sanction against any country, even any country of the world.
Forget sanctions. Do you think they will even have a targeted stance against these countries? Do you think all the Muslim nations will agree that these countries are the problem, and they're going to mention them and say that this is where
this is what I am saying, that there should be you can say a resolution in United Nations and also resolution in OIC. Why these countries are creating problem for Muslims for the last at least 2 decades? This question should be raised over there.
But do you think that's even possible in terms of the OIC stance?
Yes.
Will they do it?
This is very much possible. It's a matter of simply a resolution. And as we mentioned, there are many resolutions in United Nations, but nothing happened. You are absolutely right. I agree with you. But these are the forums. These are the international forum we can go. What else we can do? We can go for sanctions. We can go for resolutions. So sanction is not possible against them. So at least we should go for resolutions against them.
Okay, and Farooq, you can add to that, but I also want to bring in a discussion with reference to the way that the media has responded to this particular action and then others in the past, and how we need to sort of utilize this platform and make sure that certain actions are in fact highlighted, and make sure that they reach the audience that we want to, and that then that sort of enables us to take certain action, and that it's not lost between so many news that is coming from around the world. Is that the onus of countries such as Pakistan, or do you think that somehow the international media itself is not focusing on these issues as they should?
When you said media, you meant international media, right? I think that it has been proven beyond any doubt that the priorities of international media is are also skewed, right? For example, a boat carrying Pakistani migrants actually sank. Media barely spared any time. President Obama had to actually point out that everybody kept on actually focusing on that submersible, that Ocean Gate, vehicle that sank and that crashed, and because billionaires were there. So that kind of issue is there. But my humble submission is that when Agha Sahab says, what else can we do? I mean, let me go back to Einstein, who said that doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of madness, right? The humble submission right now is that we keep on asking for structures, systems, procedures, and especially this argument, a fascinating argument about laws being changed. I understand that if somebody is being protected while committing a crime, and a person who is actually knows that this thing is a crime and is not being protected are two different things. But my humble submission is, there isn't a country where a murder is not banned by the law or it is not a crime. But that doesn't mean murders don't take place, right? Or people don't get away with it.
Yeah.
Humble submission is that if you want to actually win, and Asaf was saying, what else can we do? I mean, come on, if you want to sanction, European countries, especially these three, oil is such a big weapon, and all Muslim countries are producing humongous oil. Why wouldn't they actually, at this time when Europe is going through an energy crisis already, they could have used it as a leverage, right? But I don't want to actually cut the nose to spite the face, and this is my repeatedly I am using the word humble submission, and that is because we keep on looking at, and this goes back to what our first guest was saying, right? A couple of miscreants actually bring the bad name to entire country. People live there. They are, most of them, if you have, I'm sure that Agha Sahab has also traveled to Scandinavian countries. He must actually attest to the fact how friendly and welcoming people they are, right? So I don't want actually this to become a political issue. My humble submission again is that we are the land of Malala. I wanted to say Malala land, but then that
reminds me of a movie.
yeah, that narrative goes out of hand. But land of Malala, and her statement, this one statement, that one book, one voice, one pen can and one teacher can make a difference. This is age of hyper communication. If you, I understand that the miscreants will not be actually convinced because they have an agenda, but most of the people that they keep on exploiting through all this antics and semantics can be convinced that this is what hurts us. And fundamentally human nature, Sana, is good. And if you want to convince it, I am sure that even this program can have an effect on people as well, right? Your anchoring, Agha Sahab, if he actually starts cutting non-believers some slack, I think his voice will also have the kind of impact that is needed. And I wanted to actually bring up the Prime Minister's leadership as well. I think that these days, somehow these are his lucky days. Whatever he touches or whatever he does, so, I cannot find a way to wrong it. But once again, he has actually shown moral courage by calling upon nation to protest, but peacefully. And because in the past we have seen those scenes, remember in the past, whenever there was an international incident, somebody would actually bring in some tires of cars, they would burn it, and the thing with the rubber is that it actually creates a lot of smoke, and then somebody very good looking would actually be jumping across that fire, and some foreign media photographer would come actually take the pictures, and that would be splashed all over the world that A, this is Pakistan, B, this is Muslim world, right? Thank God we haven't seen that kind of visual violence either, if we haven't seen physical violence as well. But the whole point is that we are in the 21st century, and we are in the third decade of 21st century. With due respect, why is it that we keep on going back to the crusade days, and we keep on thinking that the only way to do it is through political power? Now politics has hardly any influence. This is the age of social media, this is the age of media. You can sensitize as many people as possible, because in the end, lying, if lying is bad, and again, another thing, Sanab, very quickly, Agha Sahab keeps on referring to Quran and other books as religious symbols. They are not symbols, they are books, they are source of faith, right? There are other symbols, of course, you know, our crescent, you know, cross and others, and we should have similar kind of, you know, empathy for their sanctity as well. But with the books, the biggest problem is that right from Inquisition and Halaku Khan, right, or Genghis Khan, to any kind of vandalism, you know, the first victims are books. So anybody who is actually encouraging anybody to burn books is not a great friend of civilization. One word, that is human civilization. So I think that we can actually encourage people not to do it, because then it creates a huge problem, not only in those countries, but as was pointed out by the first guest, in the Muslim countries also, because then Swedes, then Norwegians, others actually visit other countries as well, Muslim countries, and it can create awkward situation or sad moments. I hope that doesn't happen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Farooq, for being a part of the discussion. Thank you, Agha Iqrar, for being part of the discussion as well. And of course, the nation is still observing YAUM-E-TAQADDUS-E-QURAN today. And it's important in terms of the conversation that we had, that we are able to dissect the issue and understand really what is going on and what needs to be done moving forward. This is not just about us reacting to one particular action, but understanding the core of the issue that sort of unites everybody together, people from all religions, all communities. And this is important, especially when we want to be able to inculcate tolerance in the society, and that perhaps needs to be what everyone should be doing and what the focus should be on. We're going to be, of course, talking about how this actually progresses and what sort of action is then taken, but that's all we have from the debate today. Have a nice weekend. See you Monday.